In a distant future, humanity found itself at war with an alien armada known as the Zelrath. These creatures, with their towering forms and advanced technology, threatened the very existence of human colonies scattered across the galaxy. The Galactic Fleet was tasked with protecting these colonies, but their forces were dwindling. Time was running out, and they needed a strong leader to guide them to victory. Among the cadets of the fleet was a young woman named Arya. She was small in stature, but possessed an iron will and a keen mind. Arya came from a family of soldiers, and she aimed to prove herself worthy of their legacy. Despite her skills, many of her peers saw her as weak and unworthy. This disdain only fueled her determination to succeed. One fateful day, the fleet command received troubling news. A small human colony had been overrun by the Zelrath. In a panic, they called for a fleet rally to determine their next move. But young cadets were often overlooked in decision-making. Frustrated, Arya stepped forward and insisted on her plan to reclaim the colony using a stealth mission. However, the commanders dismissed her outright. Angered by their dismissal, Arya challenged them. "You think I'm just a cadet, but I am your best chance to reclaim what's lost." But instead of a debate, Arya found herself facing punishment. The commanders ordered her to be locked in isolation until she learned her place in the hierarchy. The isolation room was a small, cold space with no windows and minimal light. They believed it would humble her. As the door clanged shut, Arya felt anger bubble inside her. She was alone, but she would not let that defeat her. In the quiet of her confinement, she began to think. She reflected on her training, her failures, and her strategies. The walls around her turned into a canvas for her thoughts. She would not waste time in isolation. She would formulate a plan. Days turned into nights as Arya honed her strategy in her mind. She had an entire operation mapped out, complete with routes, tactics, and the timing of the Zelrath patrols. All while in her prison, she practiced her voice, her speeches, imagining how she would lead a team into battle. She envisioned standing before a crowd of soldiers, the fear and doubt draining away from them as they rallied behind her. Finally, after what felt like weeks, the door swung open. The commanding officer, Captain Rand, stood at the threshold, surprised to see Arya sitting calmly in the corner. "You've had your time, cadet. Are you ready to submit to our way?" he asked gruffly. Arya stood up, her eyes fierce. I'm ready to lead," she stated confidently. The captain raised an eyebrow but nodded for her to follow. They gathered a meeting of senior officers where Arya presented her plan for reclaiming the colony with fervor and clarity. As she spoke, Captain Rand watched closely. The officers were skeptical at first, but there was something magnetic about Arya's passion and vision. They began to listen, and slowly, the room began to shift. When she finished, silence filled the space. It was a heavy silence, but it was also filled with possibility. Finally, Captain Rand spoke. "We will give this plan a chance, but if it fails, the consequences will be on you, cadet." Arya nodded. She was ready to take on the challenge. The operation was set in motion quickly. The fleet assembled a small battalion of elite troops, who were skeptical but intrigued by the sudden shift in leadership. Among them was Jace, one of the most skilled pilots in the fleet. He had often disregarded Arya as just another cadet, but something in her changed during isolation. She radiated confidence. As they prepared for the mission, Jace approached Arya. "How can we trust you to lead us?" he asked bluntly. Arya looked him in the eye. "Trust is earned through action, not words. Follow my lead, and we will make it through together." Jace saw her determination and felt a flicker of hope. The team loaded onto their ships, and Arya took command. She felt the adrenaline of leading a group of capable soldiers. As the familiar hum of the engines filled the air, Arya addressed her battalion on the comms. "We're not just fighting for our own lives. We're fighting for our families, our homes, and our future. Let's take it back." The journey to the colony was tense. The stars whirled around them as they sped through space. Once they arrived, they found the Zelrath had heavily fortified their territory. Many of the soldiers began to doubt their chances. But Arya remembered her time in isolation. She had visualized this moment 1,000 times, and she felt the fire in her spirit. "Stick to the plan," she shouted. The troops followed her every command, and with each successful maneuver, their confidence grew. They maneuvered through defensive lines, taking down outposts one by one. Jace flew alongside her in his ship, completing the mission flawlessly. As they finally neared the heart of the colony, Arya felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. This was not just a mission, this was a fight for every human left in the galaxy. The last stretch was the most dangerous, with Zelrath Main, ships looming over them, but Arya knew they could make it. "Now, push forward," she yelled. They launched everything they had. With explosive force, they broke through enemy lines and into the center of the stronghold. The battle raged around them, but under Arya's command, they began to push the Zelrath back. Together, they fought fiercely. When the dust finally settled, the Zelrath retreated, leaving the colony vulnerable, but free. Cheers erupted from her team, and for the first time, her fellow soldiers looked at her with respect and admiration. She had done it. Arya had turned her isolation into strength. Back on the starship, Arya stood in the command center, her heart swelling with pride. Captain Rand approached her, a smile on his face. "You've led us to victory, Cadet. You are no longer just a cadet. You are a leader." From that day forward, Arya became the beacon of hope for the Galactic Fleet. As they prepared for the next battle against the Zelrath, soldiers followed her without hesitation. In her isolation, she had discovered strength, and she emerged as the leader the fleet never knew it needed. Together, they would take back their galaxy. The year is 2342. Space travel is as common as airplanes were in the 21st century. The Galactic Fleet, a peacekeeping force composed of various alien species, was humanity's ticket to the stars. Among the newest batch of cadets was Emily Carter, a bright, if somewhat rebellious young woman from Earth. Emily had always been fascinated by the stars. While other kids dreamed of being doctors or athletes, she devoured books about nebulae and black holes. So, when the Galactic Fleet opened its doors to humans, she jumped at the chance. The academy was tough. The training regimen was designed to push cadets to their breaking point, both physically and mentally. And being the only human in her cohort, Emily faced additional challenges. Many of the alien cadets saw humans as primitive, emotional creatures, unfit for the rigors of space warfare. One such cadet was Zorgon, a hulking reptilian from the planet Xylar. Zorgon was everything Emily wasn't: big, strong, and utterly humorless. He saw Emily as an insult to the fleet, a weak link that would jeopardize their missions. "Humans," he'd sneer, his voice a low rumble, always relying on emotions, not logic. "You'll crack under pressure, little human." Emily tried to ignore Zorgon's taunts, focusing on her studies and training. She excelled in strategy simulations, her human intuition giving her an edge that the more logical aliens couldn't match. But Zorgon and his cronies were always there, ready to undermine her confidence. One day, during a particularly challenging combat exercise, Emily made a split-second decision that saved her team from a simulated ambush. Her quick thinking prevented what would have been a disastrous loss. But instead of praise, she was met with suspicion. "How did you know?" Zorgon demanded, his eyes narrowed. "No one could have predicted that maneuver. You must have cheated." The accusations grew louder, fueled by Zorgon's prejudice. Despite Emily's protests, the instructors launched an investigation. They pored over the simulation data, searching for any sign of foul play. But they found nothing. Still, the whispers persisted. Some believed Emily possessed some kind of psychic ability, an unfair advantage that violated the Academy's rules. The Tension reached its peak when a valuable piece of fleet technology went missing. It was a small device, no bigger than a coin, but it contained sensitive data about the fleet's defense systems. Panic swept through the academy. Zorgan wasted no time pointing the finger at Emily. "The human," he hissed. "She's always been
sneaky. She probably stole it to sell to her primitive homeworld." Despite the lack of evidence, the instructors, swayed by the prevailing anti-human sentiment, decided to take action.
They locked Emily in solitary confinement, pending further investigation. The isolation was brutal. Emily was cut off from all contact with the outside world, left alone with her thoughts and fears. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional hum of the ventilation system. Doubts crept into her mind. Maybe she didn't belong here. Maybe the aliens were right about humans being too emotional, too impulsive. But as the days turned into weeks, Emily refused to succumb to despair. She used the time to reflect on her training, to analyze her strengths and weaknesses. She realized that her intuition, the very thing that had made her a target, was also her greatest asset. It allowed her to see patterns and possibilities that others missed. Meanwhile, the search for the missing device continued, but to no avail. The academy was on lockdown. Every room and corridor searched, but the device remained elusive. The instructors were baffled. The fleet was growing impatient. As the pressure mounted, Zorgan saw an opportunity to solidify his position. He volunteered to lead the search, promising to find the device and expose Emily as a traitor. He rallied his followers, conducting aggressive searches and interrogating anyone who might have information, but Zorgan's methods were heavy-handed and ineffective. He relied on intimidation and brute force, alienating potential informants and overlooking subtle clues. The atmosphere in the academy grew toxic, with suspicion and paranoia running rampant. Then, one night, Emily had a breakthrough. As she lay on her cot, staring at the ceiling, she realized something. The device hadn't been stolen. It had been misplaced, and she knew where. Using her knowledge of the Academy's ventilation system, Emily devised a plan. She knew that the vents were rarely cleaned and that small objects could easily get trapped in the ducts. She also knew that the device was magnetic, which meant it could be stuck to a metal surface. The next morning, when the guards came to bring her food, Emily put her plan into action. She feigned illness, clutching her stomach and groaning in pain. The guards, eager to avoid a medical emergency, rushed to call for assistance. As soon as they were gone, Emily used a hairpin she had managed to conceal to pick the lock on her cell door. She slipped out into the corridor, her heart pounding, in her chest. She made her way to the nearest ventilation shaft, her mind racing. She crawled into the narrow duct, the air thick with dust and grime. The darkness was almost complete, but Emily pressed on, guided by her intuition. She followed the twists and turns of the ventilation system, her hands and knees scraped and bruised. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she found it. Wedged between two metal plates, glinting faintly in the dim light, was the missing device. Emily grabbed it, her hand trembling with relief. She emerged from the ventilation shaft, covered in dirt and sweat, just as Zorgan and his cronies were passing by. They stared at her in disbelief, their faces a mixture of shock and anger. "You!" Zorgan roared. "How did you escape, and what is that in your hand?" Emily held up the device, her eyes blazing with defiance. "I found it," she said, her voice clear and strong. "It wasn't stolen. It was just misplaced." Zorgan tried to deny it, to claim that Emily was lying, but the evidence was undeniable. The instructors arrived, their faces grim. They examined the device, confirmed its authenticity, and released Emily from custody. The truth came out. The device had fallen out of a technician's pocket during a routine maintenance check. It had been an honest mistake, but Zorgan's prejudice had turned it into a witch hunt. Emily was vindicated, her name cleared. But more than that, she had earned the respect of her fellow cadets. They had seen her courage, her intelligence, and her unwavering determination. They had seen that humans were not the emotional weaklings they had believed them to be. In the days that followed, Emily's popularity soared. Cadets from all species sought her advice and guidance. They realized that her human intuition was a valuable asset, a different way of seeing the world that could complement their own logical approaches. As for Zorgon, he was disgraced. His lies and prejudice had been exposed, and he was ostracized by his peers. He learned a valuable lesson about judging others based on preconceived notions. When graduation day arrived, Emily stood tall among her fellow cadets. She had overcome adversity, proven her worth, and earned her place in the galactic fleet. And as she looked out at the stars, she knew that her journey had just begun. Years later, Emily Carter rose through the ranks to become one of the most respected commanders in the galactic fleet. Her ability to think outside the box, to trust her instincts, and to inspire her crew made her a legend. And whenever faced with a difficult decision, she would always remember her time in isolation, the lesson she learned about the power of human intuition. She became the only one the fleet would follow, not because she was human, but because she was the best. The metal door hissed shut, plunging Cadet Ilara Vance into darkness. The light panel flickered once, twice, then died, leaving her alone in the Fleet Academy's isolation cell. Panic clawed at her throat, but she forced it down. Humans weren't known for their physical strength in the galactic fleet, but they were known for their stubbornness. And Ilara Vance was nothing if not stubborn. She was the first human to be accepted into the Fleet Academy, a grand experiment by the Galactic Council to foster better understanding between species. Most cadets were either indifferent or politely curious. Some, like the hulking Klargon warrior, Vorlag, were openly hostile. He saw her as a weakling, a waste of space in the ranks of the galaxy's protectors. The reason for her isolation was simple: insubordination. During a training exercise, Vorlag had deliberately targeted her shuttle, disabling her engines and leaving her drifting in the asteroid field. Protocol dictated she wait for rescue, but Ilara, seeing another cadet's ship in danger, had rerouted. Power restarted her engines and pulled the other cadet out of the asteroid's path. She'd saved a life, but she'd also disobeyed a direct order. Vorlag had been furious. The instructors, while acknowledging her bravery, had no choice but to punish her. Isolation was the standard procedure for insubordination. 3 days alone with her thoughts, a chance to reflect on her actions. Ilara ran her hand along the cold metal wall. The cell was small, maybe 3 meters by 3 meters. No windows, no distractions. Just a thin mattress on the floor and a malfunctioning light panel. Most cadets would spend the time brooding, regretting their mistakes. Ilara decided to use it differently. She started with physical exercises, push-ups, sit-ups, anything to keep her body active. The confined space made it difficult, but she pushed herself. Then she moved on to mental exercises. She reviewed fleet protocols, practiced alien languages, and ran simulations in her head of different combat scenarios. Time blurred. The silence was broken only by the hum of the ventilation system. Ilara lost track of day and night, but with each passing hour, she felt her resolve hardening. She hadn't been wrong to save that cadet. Rules were important, but lives were more important. On the second day, she started to analyze the training exercise. Vorlag hadn't just disabled her engines. He targeted a specific power conduit, one that only someone with inside knowledge of her shuttle's design would know. It was sabotage, plain and simple. But why? Was it just because she was human? Or was there something more to it? Ilara knew. Vorlag was ambitious, eager to climb the ranks. Could her presence in the academy be a threat to his aspirations? The thought sparked an idea. If Vorlag was willing to break the rules to get ahead, who else was? And what were they capable of? By the third day, Ilara was a different person. The fear and uncertainty had vanished, replaced by a steely determination. She wasn't just a cadet anymore. She was an investigator. She had a mystery to solve, and she wouldn't rest until she uncovered the truth. The door hissed open, and Instructor Valerius, a stern-faced Volusian, stepped inside. "Cadet Vance, your isolation is complete. You are expected to report to the training grounds immediately." Ilara stood up, her eyes fixed on Valerius. "Instructor, I have reason to believe that my shuttle was deliberately sabotaged during the training exercise." Valerius raised an eyebrow. "Sabotage? That's a serious accusation, Cadet." "I have evidence," Ilara said, her voice firm. "Vorlag targeted a specific power conduit. Only someone with detailed knowledge of my shuttle's design could have done that." Valerius paused, considering her words. "I will look into it, Cadet. But for now, you will follow your orders." Ilara nodded, but she knew she couldn't rely on the instructors to solve this. She had to do it herself. The training grounds were bustling with activity. Cadets from different species were sparring, practicing flight maneuvers and running simulations. Vorlag stood in the center of the arena, surrounded by his admirers. He smirked when he saw Ilara. "Well, well, look who's back," he sneered. "Did you learn your lesson, little human?" Ilara ignored him and walked towards the simulation chamber. She needed to access the fleet's database to gather more information about Vorlag and his associates. As she entered the chamber, she noticed a group of cadets huddled around a console, their faces illuminated by the screen. They were whispering, their eyes darting nervously. As Ilara approached, they quickly dispersed. Curiosity piqued. Ilara sat down at the console and accessed the simulation logs. What she found made her blood run cold. The cadets had been altering the simulation parameters, rigging the scenarios to favor Vorlag and his allies. They were cheating, plain and simple. Ilara knew she had to expose them, but she also knew she couldn't do it alone. She needed someone she could trust, someone who believed in justice. She thought of the cadet she had saved in the asteroid field, a young Andorian named Rexus. Rexus was surprised to hear from her. He had been ostracized by Vorlag and his group after Ilara saved him. He was more than willing to help. Together they gathered evidence, piecing together the puzzle of Vorlag's conspiracy. They discovered that Vorlag and his allies were planning to sabotage the upcoming fleet exercises, framing a rival faction and seizing control of the Academy. It was a dangerous game, one that could have dire consequences for the entire galaxy. Ilara and Rexus presented their evidence to Instructor Valerius. At first, he was skeptical, but the evidence was undeniable. He immediately launched an investigation, uncovering the full extent of Vorlag's plot. Vorlag and his allies were arrested and expelled from the Academy. Their careers were ruined, their reputations tarnished. Ilara was hailed as a hero, but for Ilara, it wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about justice, about doing what was right. She had faced isolation, hostility, and danger, but she had emerged stronger, more determined than ever. The incident changed the way the fleet saw humans. They were no longer seen as weaklings, but as resourceful, courageous, and fiercely loyal allies. Ilara's actions had proven that strength wasn't just about physical power. It was about character, about integrity, about the willingness to stand up for what you believe in. Years later, Ilara Vance rose through the ranks of the fleet, becoming one of its most respected commanders. She led countless missions, defending the galaxy from threats both internal and external. And whenever she faced a difficult decision, she always remembered her time in isolation, the lessons she had learned, and the values she had embraced. And in the darkest hours, when the fleet faced its greatest challenges, it was Ilara Vance, the human cadet who had once been locked away, who emerged as the only one they would follow. Her time in isolation had forged her into a leader, a symbol of hope in a galaxy filled with uncertainty. The little human cadet proved to everyone that it is not the size of the dog in the fight, but the size of the fight in the dog. In the year 2210, The Galactic Federation was at war. Space battles scattered across the stars left many planets in ruins. The Federation had an elite group of soldiers known as the Cadets. They trained hard to protect their home. Among them was a young human girl named Lily. Lily had always dreamed of becoming a pilot. She was brave, smart, and a little stubborn. She worked harder than anyone else in her class, but there was one thing that made her stand out: her ability to connect with others. Lily could bring a smile even to those who felt hopeless. Her friends, Ava and Marcus, were her biggest supporters. They often teased her, calling her the heart of the cadets. One day, a surprise attack by the enemy caught the fleet off guard. The cadet base was destroyed, and many of her fellow soldiers were captured. Out of desperation, the top commanders decided to put every cadet through isolation training. They believed that if they could break human spirits and then restore them, it would prepare them for greater challenges. This training was controversial. Most cadets feared it, but Lily volunteered without a second thought. She thought she could prove how strong humans really were. With a heavy heart, Lily was led to a small, dimly lit room. The door shut behind her with a loud thud. In the beginning, she felt the weight of loneliness clinging to her. Days turned into weeks. She missed her friends and felt time creeping by slowly. Each day, Lily asked herself if she was strong enough for this, but deep inside, she remembered what made her human: hope and bravery. In the isolation room, there was a small screen. Messages from her friends popped up from time to time. Marcus wrote one day, "Lily, we believe in you. Don't lose hope." That message ignited a fire in her heart. Lily decided to turn her isolation into a learning experience. She began to imagine herself flying through space, creating strategies, and thinking about how she would lead her team when they got back together. One day, a new face appeared on the screen. It was Commander Gray, the officer overseeing the isolation training. He appeared stern and serious. "Lily," he said, "your training is to test how far you can go alone. But remember, the strength of a leader comes from understanding others first." This message changed everything for Lily. She realized that being locked away had given her time to reflect on herself, but she wanted to harness the strength of others too. Using what limited resources she had, she practiced leadership techniques. She would imagine what each of her friends would do in certain situations, how they'd think, and how they'd feel. She felt a connection to them that she had never expected, as though. The days passed. She became stronger. She focused on breathing techniques to calm her mind and create a vision for her journey ahead. She practiced out loud, speaking motivational words as if her friends were right there with her. In that small room, she transformed into a beacon of strength, a reflection of hope for others. Finally, after many long weeks, the door creaked. Open. Commander Gray stood on the other side. "You have shown us incredible strength, Lily. You did what most could not. Welcome back." When she stepped out, her friends rushed to her side. They were different than before. Fear and doubt had faded from their eyes. Lily felt the warmth of their hugs and knew they shared a bond deeper than before. As they returned to the training ground, news spread about Lily's journey. Many cadets were in awe of how she turned her isolation into a source of strength. They gathered around her, eager to hear about what she had learned. "Lily!" Ava shouted excitedly. "What should we do next?" Lily looked around at her friends, feeling a surge of passion. "We stand together. We are stronger together. Let's prepare for our next mission. Let's protect our fleet." The cadets cheered, inspired by her words. With renewed spirit, they worked as one, learning and growing from each other. When the time came for their next mission, the cadets were ready. They boarded their ships with a strong conviction. Lily was at the helm of one of the ships, feeling a sense of purpose radiate through her. As the fleet took off, Lily saw the pride in the eyes of her friends. They believed in her, and she believed in them. As they flew into the heart of enemy territory, Danger loomed, but there was no fear in Lily's heart. She activated her ship's systems, guiding her team with confidence. "Trust each other, and we will persevere," she shouted. Just as they reached the enemy stronghold, they encountered heavy fire. Panic began to seep in, yet Lily's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Stay focused. Follow my lead. Remember what we learned together." The cadets looked at each other and found their strength in unity. Together, they maneuvered through the assault, dodging enemy fire and overcoming obstacles. It felt like a dance of skill, and for the first time, they felt invincible. Finally, with Lily leading the charge, the fleet breached the enemy's defenses. The battle turned, and victory was within reach. As they claimed triumph over the enemy, Lily knew the real victory was the bond they had formed during her isolation. The fleet had become a family. From that day forth, Lily became a legend among the cadets, the human girl who turned isolation into strength. Whenever they faced tough times, they remembered the lessons she taught them. They would always stand together, no matter the odds. In a galaxy filled with chaos, it was not technology or weapons that united them. It was the power of hope, trust, and the belief that they could face anything as long as they were together. And against all odds, they followed Lily into every battle, ready to face whatever the universe threw at them next. The metal door hissed shut, sealing Cadet Eva Rostova in the small, sterile room. It wasn't a prison, not exactly. It was an isolation chamber, designed for soldiers of the galactic fleet who were deemed a risk to themselves, or to others. Eva didn't know why she was here. One moment, she was in the simulator, acing the Kobayashi Maru for the 10th time. The next, 2 hulking krill guards were escorting her to this box. Eva was human, the first human to ever be accepted into the Galactic Fleet Academy. The other cadets, the krill, the Zith, the Felinoids, they watched her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. She was an anomaly, a variable they couldn't compute. Humans were, after all, a relatively new species on the galactic stage. They were known for their tenacity, their adaptability, and their unpredictability. The room was bare except for a cot, a small table, and a screen on the wall. The screen flickered to life, displaying the stern face of Commander Zara Thok, a krill whose scales shimmered like obsidian. "Cadet Rostova," Zara Thok's voice boomed. "You have been placed in isolation due to concerns about your performance in the advanced combat simulations." Eva frowned. "Concerns? I was exceeding expectations. I broke every record." "Precisely," Zara Thok said, her eyes narrowed. "Your tactics are unconventional. Your strategies, while effective, are unsettling. The Council believes you pose a potential threat to the established order of the fleet." "Threat? I'm trying to save lives," Eva protested. "The simulations are designed to test our limits, to push us beyond what we think is possible. I'm just thinking outside the box." Zara Thok remained impassive. "The box exists for a reason, Cadet. It provides structure. It ensures predictability. Your thinking is too chaotic. You are dismissed." The screen went blank. Eva stared at the blank screen, her mind racing. What did they want from her? Did they want her to fail, to conform, to be just another cog in their perfectly oiled machine? She paced the small room, her frustration growing with each step. Days turned into weeks. Eva spent her time exercising, meditating, and replaying the simulations in her head, analyzing her every move. She realized Zara Thok was right. Her tactics were unconventional. She didn't follow the established protocols. She improvised. She adapted. She used the enemy's weaknesses against them, even if it meant bending the rules a little. But wasn't that what war was about? Survival? Winning at all costs? The fleet's tactics were rigid, predictable. They relied on brute force and overwhelming firepower. But what if the enemy was smarter? What if they were faster? What if they had a weapon the fleet had never seen? Before Eva knew she had to prove herself. She had to show them that her unconventional thinking wasn't a threat, but an asset. She just needed a chance. Then the alarms blared. The room shook. The screen flickered back to life, this time showing a frantic Zarathok. "Rostova, the Zargonian armada has breached our defenses. They're using a new type of cloaking technology. We can't see them. The fleet is being slaughtered." Eva's heart pounded in her chest. This was it, her chance. "Commander, let me out. I know how to defeat them." Zarathok hesitated. "You? You're still in isolation." "I'm the only one who can help you. Please." "Commander, trust me," Eva pleaded. Zarathok's face was etched with desperation. "Fine, but if you betray us, Rostova, I will personally vaporize you." The door hissed open. Eva sprinted through the corridors, following the sound of explosions and panicked voices. She reached the command center, a scene of chaos and destruction. Screens flickered with static, consoles sparked, and officers shouted orders that were lost in the din. "Rostova, what do you have?" Zarathok barked, her voice barely audible above the noise. "They're using cloaking technology that bends light around their ships, making them invisible," Eva explained quickly. "But they can't bend gravity. We need to use gravity sensors to detect the distortions in space-time caused by their mass." The officers stared at her blankly. "Gravity sensors? We haven't used those in decades. They're outdated." "Not anymore," Eva retorted. "Repurpose the long-range scanners. Recalibrate them to detect gravitational anomalies. Do it now." Zarathok, seeing no other option, barked the orders. The officers scrambled to comply, their fingers flying across the consoles. Within minutes, the scanners were recalibrated. "We're picking up something," an officer shouted. "Faint gravitational distortions near Sector Gamma." "That's them," Eva exclaimed. "Target those distortions. Use pulse cannons. They bypass cloaking." The fleet opened fire, unleashing a barrage of energy that tore through the void. The Zargonian ships, no longer cloaked, were caught in the crossfire. Explosions rocked the command center as the enemy vessels were ripped apart. The tide of the battle began to turn. Eva, with her unconventional tactics and her ability to think outside the box, guided the fleet through the chaos. She predicted the enemy's movements, exploited their weaknesses, and led the counterattack with unwavering confidence. The Zargonians, caught off guard and outmaneuvered, were forced to retreat. The battle was won. The fleet was saved. Silence fell over the command center as the last of the enemy ships disappeared into the darkness. The officers stared at Eva, their faces a mixture of awe and disbelief. Zarathok approached Eva, her obsidian scales gleaming in the dim light. You did it, Rostova. You saved us." "We did it," Eva corrected, a small smile playing on her lips. "Together." The news of Eva's bravery and ingenuity spread like wildfire throughout the fleet. She was no longer just the human cadet, the anomaly, the variable they couldn't compute. She was a hero. The council convened, their faces etched with humility. They released Eva from isolation and promoted her to the rank of commander. They realized that her unconventional thinking wasn't a threat, but a necessity. The fleet needed her, now more than ever. As Eva stood on the bridge of her new command ship, the cheers of her crew echoing in her ears, she knew that her journey had just begun. She was the human who had broken the mold, the one who had dared to think differently. And now, she was the one the fleet would follow, into the unknown, into the future, where anything was possible. Once upon a time, in a galaxy not so far away, a space fleet called the Stellar Guardian was tasked with exploring new worlds and defending weaker planets from alien threats. Among the fleet was a human cadet named Mira. Mira was not a typical cadet. She was small in stature but had a fiery spirit. Her curiosity often led her into trouble, as she always wanted to know more, do more, and be more. Mira had always dreamed of being a leader, much like her inspiration, Captain Eldra. Captain Eldra was known throughout the fleet for her bravery and wisdom. However, Mira sometimes struggled with following rules. One day she disobeyed an order that could have made her a hero, but instead got her locked in isolation for a week. The isolation chamber was a small, dark room with only a cot and a tiny window. It had thick walls that muffled sound, and she felt utterly alone. As the days passed, Mira's mind raced with thoughts of what had happened. She thought about the mission that had gone wrong and how she could have approached it differently. In her solitude, she reflected deeply on her actions. She tapped into her creativity, using the time to write in a small journal she had hidden in her uniform. Outside the chamber, her fellow cadets were worried. They had seen Mira's potential, even if she often took risks. Emma, her closest friend, was particularly heartbroken. She knew Mira was always trying to prove herself. Emma felt that isolation was too severe a punishment for her friend. She decided to talk to Captain Eldra. "Captain, I believe we should give Mira another chance," Emma said earnestly. "She has a heart for this fleet that is unmatched." "We all make mistakes." Captain Eldra saw the determination in Emma's eyes and nodded slowly. "Sometimes, growth comes from hardship. But if she is truly ready to change, then perhaps we can help her see the bigger picture." Back in isolation, Mira had an unexpected realization. The darkness of the walls felt less suffocating as she focused on her dreams. She imagined leading her own crew, guiding them through the stars, and protecting the innocent. She picked up her journal and wrote, "A great leader listens, learns, and loves their crew. I must do better." After the week passed, Captain Eldra made a surprise visit to the isolation chamber. She opened the door, and light flooded in, illuminating Mira's face. Mira looked up, her eyes wide with a mixture of hope and fear. "Mira," Captain Eldra said softly, "this wasn't just a punishment, it was a lesson. I believe you have the potential to become one of the best leaders in the fleet. Are you ready to lead?" Mira nodded eagerly, her heart racing. She had dreamed of this moment, and it had come true. Instead of returning to her previous role, she was now given a chance to join Captain Eldra on a special mission as a junior officer. Mira felt excitement bubbling inside her. This was her time to prove herself. The mission was to scout a new planet that was rumored to host a hostile alien race. They needed reconnaissance before making any moves. As part of the crew, Mira was both thrilled and nervous. Captain Eldra had confidence in her, which kindled a fire in Mira. As they approached the planet, tensions rose. Mira and the crew had to gather information while staying undetected. During a scouting trip, Mira spotted something unusual in the distance. A group of aliens was gathering near a structure. "Captain, I see a cluster of activity," Mira said, pointing it out. "They seem to be preparing for something." "Good eye, Mira. Let's get closer," Captain Eldra replied, impressed. Mira's heart swelled as she realized her input was valued. They managed to gather critical information, but as they tried to leave, they encountered a patrol of the alien race. A chase ensued, with Mira quickly taking charge. "We need to split up. They won't know where to go if we scatter," she yelled. Her plan worked, and they managed to evade capture, but not without losing one of their ships. In the process, they made it back to the Stellar Guardian with the vital information, but Captain Eldra was gravely aware of the loss. Back on the ship, the crew was shaken but grateful to be alive. Mira, realizing the weight of her choices, felt an unusual mix of pride and sadness. "I should have seen the danger earlier," she admitted. The crew listened as they settled their nerves. "Mira, you let us out of danger," a fellow cadet chimed in. "You didn't abandon us. You made choices based on the situation and saved our lives." The crew began to nod in agreement, and Mira looked at them, realizing she had earned their trust. Days later, the commanding officers of the fleet held a meeting. They were discussing their next steps based on the information gathered from Mira and her team. The aliens were planning an attack on a nearby planet, and it was essential for the fleet to prepare. Captain Eldra stood in front of the officers and addressed the crowd. "Thanks to our junior officer, Mira, we know what we are up against. She has shown leadership under pressure. I believe she should be at the forefront of our plans." As the meeting concluded, Mira stood there, stunned. She had gone from being locked in isolation to becoming a leader everyone respected. The journey had changed her, nurtured her talents, and shown her how vital teamwork was. She turned to Captain Eldra, who smiled and nodded. The day finally came to launch their counterattack. Mira stood alongside Captain Eldra, leading the fleet into battle. She felt confident and strong, knowing she had faced her challenges and had grown from Eao. The fleet followed her, and together they fought bravely, defending the innocent and securing peace for the galaxy. In the end, Mira had not only proven herself as a leader, but she had also transformed her flaws into strengths. Through isolation, she found clarity. Through hardship, she discovered her path. As the crew celebrated their victory, Mira knew she would always carry the lessons of her journey with her, ready to inspire others in the vast, starry universe.